body-cam video a game changer in the George Floyd case? The defense thinks so. They are saying in this video, if you look at George Floyd's mouth, and we're going to zoom in and freeze on it, you're going to see it. You're going to see a white dot. They say that's 2 milligrams of fentanyl. That's what they say right there in George Floyd. Remember, the toxicology did indicate fentanyl in his system. Police talking and suspecting that he was under the influence of some sort of drug at the time that they confronted him. So I posted this on social media, and I asked the question, is this reasonable doubt? Is this a reasonable explanation for the way George Floyd died? Not the knee on the neck, but that white spot on his tongue. Fentanyl. So posted it. Let's begin with our 13th juror. Comment of the day tonight coming from Victoria, who says, that pill just cleared those cops. Simply so a society can let out a collective breath and say, see, I knew the police weren't that bad. Titus, let me ask you, how potentially big is this piece of evidence coupled with the toxicology showing that there was fentanyl in his system? Is this a game changer?
No, because first you have to prove that that dot actually was fentanyl, as opposed to being gum or alcohol or something else. Simply saying, hey, there's a white dot there, it has to be drugs, is a huge leap of logic. Second, you have to assume that even if it was drugs, that those drugs would have killed him without having someone's knee on the back of your throat for 9 minutes. Because that's the issue that all these people who want the officers to be proven innocent keep on forgetting. You have to assume that that small dot by itself would have killed him and not put your knee on someone's neck.
Yetta tonight, I don't care what was in his mouth. What the heck does that have to do with that cop kneeling on his neck, as Titus just said, for 8 minutes? Come on, people. It could have been gum or peppermint. Holly, is fentanyl a reasonable explanation for the death? Because you know that each one of these defendants is going to have an expert who's going to come into court. I've seen it before. They're going to be just as qualified as the state's expert, and they will say it was the fentanyl. Then they'll show the video. They're going to say that's fentanyl. Is it? They don't have to prove it beyond a reasonable doubt. They just have to raise a reasonable doubt. Is that a reasonable explanation for the death of George Floyd?
110% no. I don't care if George Floyd had fentanyl on his tongue. I don't care if he had a kilo in the back seat. Fentanyl, possession of fentanyl, consuming fentanyl is not punishable, even if George Floyd did this by death. Our 8th Amendment of our Constitution protects people from unreasonable death or issues with determination of if they're guilty or not. It doesn't matter. I don't care how much fentanyl he had. It doesn't negate what the cops did. The cops were trained. We all saw the video. We saw the video for 8+ minutes. It's beyond words describable. I don't care how much fentanyl he may or may not have had. It didn't cause his death, and it doesn't matter.
Edward tonight writes, the knee on his neck did not block his windpipe. Get a life. Floyd killed himself with a lethal dose of fentanyl. Probably put it in his mouth when he was startled by police and didn't want to get caught. I believe that's what the defense is going to argue, by the way. Dave Arenberg, is this a problem? Is fentanyl a problem for prosecutors here? It's in the toxicology. They're going to bring in their expert, and they're going to show this video to the jury.
Vinny, there were 2 autopsies done, and both of them found that it was a homicide. Both of them found that the cause of death was not fentanyl. It was either, according to the second autopsy, the knee on the neck, or on the first autopsy, that it was still a homicide, although the language is a little softer. The bottom line is, what killed him? And just saying that there's a white spot on his tongue that's not backed up by either of the 2 autopsies may not even be allowed to get to the jury. The judge will still have to allow that defense to go to the jury. It's certainly not going to get the defendant cleared on a motion to dismiss, which is what's happening. So I don't think this is the end of the world. At worst, it's something that the jury will hear, but the evidence speaks otherwise. And one more thing, that cop delegation continued to hold George Floyd down for 3 minutes after George Floyd stopped moving, and for 2 minutes after he knew that George Floyd had no pulse. To me, that's plenty of evidence to convict.
Jessica, tonight the defense doesn't have to prove anything beyond a reasonable doubt. They just need to put doubt in the jury's mind. And it looks like this, coupled with George Floyd's history and tox screen, just might do it. Titus, are you concerned at all, Titus? And again, I look at this case, I heard the prosecutor, when he first got it, the Attorney General of Minnesota say, this is not an easy case. And Dave knows no cases are easy, so prosecutor, you got to dot your I's, cross your T's. But he said this is not an easy case. Does this do anything? Because they're going to battle. I mean, all four of them are going to fight cause of death here. And what if you have one trial, like prosecutors want, and each one of those defendants brings in their own forensic pathologist, and four of them get up on the stand during the course of the trial in front of the same jury, and they all say, fentanyl, 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 fentanyl. Could that be a problem?
Well, that's assuming that all four of those experts come together and say the exact same thing. As anyone who's been in a trial knows, witnesses are not always consistent. So you have four experts who are all being paid individually, and the prosecution, if they're good, is going to find contradictions within each expert. So then you're going to have each expert undermining the other expert in order to show that their point of view is much more valid, and thus their guy is more innocent. And it all comes back to the same question I posed before. What proof do you have that that white dot you saw actually was fentanyl as opposed to anything else? Do you have something that totally excludes the possibility that it was something else he had in his mouth at the time of his death? And then the second hurdle defense is going to have to overcome. How does that exclude the fact that the officer put his knee on George Floyd's throat for 9 minutes? You first have to find an expert who could say that that knee on his throat did not in any way interfere with his capability of breathing.
Kayla writes, if the police officers thought he was having a drug overdose, why in the world were they leaning on his neck like that? It makes no sense, and this video does not help them at all. Holly, we have about 20 seconds here. Is it possible that this could be something less than murder?
Well, I think the prosecution has an interesting way of going about this. You can go for the gusto, which, we saw the video. We saw the extenuating circumstances of that knee on the neck and the plea for help and the plea for life and the plea for his mother. I'm not sure that there's going to be any evidence that can negate what we actually saw. We'll leave it up to defense attorneys to get creative between now and that point, but
they will.
I've seen it. And they will, and that's their jobs, and that's what they should do in their representation of all of those officers, but we've all seen it, and we've had that visceral reaction to that video.
Dave Amberg, Holly Waltman, Titus Nichols, what a great panel tonight. Thank you all so much. Have a wonderful night, and we'll see you soon back here on Court TV Live. That's it for tonight, folks. I'm Vinny Politan. It's been great having you aboard this evening. We're here every night, 8 to 11. Have a great night. And don't forget,